Special counsel Robert Mueller is demanding documents from the Trump Organization. This is the first known time he subpoenaed documents directly related to President Trump's business dealings. Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders was asked about these latest developments on Thursday.
As we've maintained all along, and as the president has said numerous times, there was no collusion between the campaign and Russia. For specific questions regarding the Trump Organization, I would refer you to them.
But is that statement the president made in that interview back in July still stand, that it would be a red line for the special counsel to be investigating the Trump?
We're going to continue to fully cooperate out of respect for the special counsel. We're not going to comment for any specific questions about the Trump Organization. I'd refer you there.
Bloomberg's chief Washington correspondent, Kevin Cirilli, is in Washington and joins us now to talk about what we just heard. Kevin, Sarah Huckabee Sanders there repeating the White House line. There's been no collusion. They've been cooperating this entire time. But she stopped short of saying Mueller had crossed this infamous red line that President Trump really had laid out. What do you make of the response and its indication, the subpoena, of where the investigation stands now?
Well, two things. First and foremost, where the investigation is headed now has certainly moved beyond just the scope of collusion. Now, that has frustrated Republicans, but some Republicans would agree with it. Look, the notion that the subpoenas are now being issued to the Trump Organization only adds that Bob Mueller's team is looking to really cover all their bases with regards to this. But on the flip side of that, the second point that I would make is that this is an administration today that issued sweeping sanctions against Russians, more than a dozen Russian individuals, for regarding meddling in the election, a cyber attack pertaining to the healthcare industry that left hospitals in the United States unable to back up with paper documents some of their healthcare records, and also impacted, according to Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin, billions of dollars in global trade throughout the world, spanning 3 continents. So this is an administration that publicly President Trump has not been as aggressive in targeting with his rhetoric against the Russians. But today I spoke with several Democrats up on Capitol Hill who were quite praiseworthy of what the president had to do. In their opinion, better late than never.
I guess, Kevin, but the key question remains, whenever the Trump administration drags its feet to do what Congress has already agreed to do what the intelligence agencies needs to be done, the question is, why does it take so long? So you have the White House Thursday agreeing to impose these sanctions on Russian hackers for the election interference. Why do you think that decision was made now after delaying it for so long?
You know, I put that question to Senator Chris Coons earlier today, a Democrat from Delaware, a member of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and he's frustrated. And quite frankly, those types of questions are going to come up in the confirmation hearing for CIA Director Mike Pompeo, who has been nominated by President Trump to replace Secretary of State Rex Tillerson. But the notion that this has taken so long is drawing criticism not just from Democrats, but also from people like Senator Lankford, a Republican from Oklahoma, who are urging this administration to get tough with Russia. I spoke with one source earlier today in the intelligence community who really said, look, this is a good first step with sanctions against Russia, but it doesn't go nearly as far as some had hoped. So these criticisms are going to only continue unless there is presented a clear strategy. And that was Senator Coons' point earlier to me. Unless there is a clear strategy for how this administration is trying to better protect democratic institutions in terms of elections and private sector institutions in terms of now the healthcare industry, as well as Silicon Valley.
Now, I want you and our viewers to listen to President Trump addressing the poisoning of a former Russian spy in England, because I think what he says is noteworthy. Let's listen.
It certainly looks like the Russians were behind it, something that should never, ever happen. And we're taking it very seriously, as I think are many others.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, it certainly looks like the Russians are behind it. Is the most forceful language we've heard from President Trump against Russia on this point. Did that comment come as a surprise to you at all?
Well, I think in the sense that this incident was cited by the Treasury Department as well as President Trump today as part of their announcement of this latest round of sanctions. This has drawn swift condemnation, not only from President Trump, but also around the world, including from Theresa May over in the UK. This is a very serious notion that the Russians would poison a diplomat to some extent of another government. That is very unusual, number one, and very alarming. It has drawn condemnation across the political spectrum. And to your point, absolutely, yes, this is really staunch criticism that we've heard from President Trump. Perhaps it's also the timetable of this is the shortest we've seen, with him responding more quickly than we have in the past to other allegations against the Russians.
Now, I want to get an economic question into you before our time runs out. First, what kind of role do you think Larry Kudlow will play as the president's new economic advisor? And what do you make of the Washington Post reports that Trump admitted to making up a claim to the Canadian prime minister about the trade deficit with that country?
Well, Larry Kudlow is cut from the same type of media cloth as President Trump is. I think that this is someone who's going to be a salesman in chief in terms of carrying an economic message for the Trump administration, better so, candidly, than someone like Gary Cohn. On the flip side of that, from his policy, which, to be frank, matters more, he's more aligned with the likes of Peter Navarro's of the world than he would be with Gary Cohn's. Peter Navarro, of course, being more of a protectionist than someone like Gary Cohn, who was more of someone who was a globalist. So that'll be interesting. There's now another voice, a resurgent voice from the likes of folks who align themselves with an economic message put forth by the likes of Steve Bannon and Stephen Miller. On the flip side of that, your second question regarding NAFTA and the negotiations, NAFTA negotiations are nearing completion. Prime Minister Trudeau is someone who is really pressing this administration for trying to get some type of better deal. But President Trump has maintained, similarly to as he did on the campaign trail, that he wants this negotiated better. He's running out the clock in the sense that he's trying to pressure not only Mexico but also the Canadians to get some type of stronger bilateral deal. That's why you saw the tariff announcement last week in the aluminum and steel industries, and it's why you're seeing him talk about and tweet about, rather, the trade surplus or lack thereof with Canada and Mexico.
Never a slow day in
Never
Washington.
Never a slow day, but
days.
we live for this.
You're exactly right. Kevin Sorelli with Bloomberg. Great to chat with you, joining us in Washington.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Criminal defense attorney Vinu Varghese joins me now with more on Mueller's subpoena. And Vinu, this is serious because it's the first time that we know of that Special Counsel Mueller has really demanded these Trump Organization documents. And that's despite, the White House saying that they voluntarily shared Trump Organization documents months ago. So why might the special counsel be subpoenaing these documents now?
Well, it's making it official. It's clearly an indication by Special Counsel Mueller that he's no longer being patient. By issuing a subpoena, now there are penalties that can be attached if you don't comply with the subpoena. The organization or the officers can potentially be held in contempt. The United States Supreme Court has said that there is no Fifth Amendment privilege for a corporation, even though it said there's a First Amendment privilege for a corporation. There is no Fifth Amendment privilege. So when a subpoena is issued on a corporation, and the Trump Organization has 515 known subsidiaries, subcorporations. So probably what happened is they issued subpoenas and they were voluntarily before issuing subpoenas, the Trump Organization or members were voluntarily cooperating, but that cooperation wasn't sufficient. Now you're issuing subpoenas. Now there's teeth.
And I guess what you're getting to is the symbolism of this. So it's a sign as well that not only the documents that you provided aren't enough, but the indications that President Trump says he gets from his lawyers that, hey, this will all be wrapped up soon. It was before Thanksgiving, it was before Christmas, it was before New Year's. There seems to be a kind of another layer of messaging here as well.
Well, I think the message is as follows. It used to be there are two things that are known in life, death and taxes, right? Yeah. But in this case, the third thing now you can know is that Special Counsel Mueller will eventually get to Donald Trump. So it's just a matter of time. I think it's a certainty. Just a couple of weeks ago, the Mueller team questioned a guy named George Nader, who is an advisor to the UAE Prince Mohammed. And he's not cooperating with the investigation. And he's tying, there was a meeting in the Seychelles a year ago with Nader and Prince and a Russian involved there that's connected to Putin. So all of this just means it's getting back to Trump, and it's just a matter of time.
What are they likely to find? The Times reported that President Trump was interested in having one of his Trump Towers built in Moscow back in 2015. Could documents related to that deal and why it never happened be relevant and create legal problems for the president here?
Yes, because his lawyer, Michael Cohen, has gone on record, gave an interview with the Wall Street Journal saying that 3 different times he spoke to candidate Trump about the Russia deal, and that Mr. Trump had signed a non-binding agreement to build this tower in Russia. This was at the same time while during interviews he was praising Putin and criticizing President Obama, then President Obama. So, you have Michael Cohen now, who has a lawyer of his own. And this is the same attorney who made the payment to Stormy Daniels.
Right.
So everything is just starting to come together, for special counsel Mueller.
I could talk to you about this for hours. I just want to ask one last quick question in our final minute together, because you mentioned the number of subsidiaries within the Trump organization. How long is it likely that they would be able to abide by this subpoena and get the necessary documents? How much time would Mueller give them?
I imagine he'd probably put a short leash on it, probably like 30 to 60 days, because this is how long this has been going on a while. But they may then request more time. If they find that the scope is too broad, they can potentially seek legal action to try to limit the scope, but that wouldn't look good for the Trump organization.
All right, criminal defense attorney Venu Varghese, thanks very much. Nice pocket square.
Oh, thank you.
Appreciate this time.